Okay, let's have a look at the main dish of the day. Levon Aronian against Hikaru Nakamura. Well, you can see the result of the game. Aronian won the game. He now has 2 out of 2 and leads the tournament. And this was a very interesting game indeed. First of all, you have to remember that just a few weeks ago, Nakamura defeated Aronian at the London Chess Classic in a very, very nice game. So Aronian was looking for revenge, and well, they had a really nice game. Okay, Leningrad Dutch. So Nakamura showing he's up for a fight. A risky move. It's a risky move because you expose this diagonal and you expose the 7th rank. Black's king is always potentially in danger when you play the Dutch, and this is the reason why I always, sometimes I played the Dutch, but often I regretted this move. And we're going to see in this game that this was yet another case where Black's king came to grief in the end and not White's king. Let's have a look. Queen b3. Okay, this is a pretty normal move. And now Queen a3. Well, it's been played by a few people, but notably Korchnoi played this idea. Bateman says, I think showed Nakamura has not yet recovered from his collapse in Reggio. Well, I don't know. You could say that, but you could also say that Aronian is a brilliant player, actually. Well, we'll come on. We'll talk about that later. Okay, the pawn pushed on, as often takes place in Leningrad Dutch. Your white is trying to exploit this weak square, and of course it opens up this diagonal. So there are pros and cons to this move, but it's a principled move to try and get control over e6. And now this is the idea of this funny maneuver. Queen to a3. You advance the b pawn very quickly indeed, and chip away at this pawn. And well, even this is a kind of double-edged decision, because the big plus from White's viewpoint is that you now have the d4 square under your control. But the minus is that you lose control over c5. So it's a trade-off. Okay, let's see what happens. Knight b5. Interesting idea. Very interesting indeed. It means there's a little bit of pressure here. And if the pawn ever advances, then yeah, Black has weaknesses on the b file. And I must say, I like White's position here, and I think this was a good opening from Aronian. Okay, let's get on to the critical moments in the game. There's a lot to get through here. And here is where it all kicks off. If Black doesn't take here, if Black doesn't take decisive action, then I don't like his position at all, I have to say. The pawn can come to a5, and then that one pawn controls these two, cramps these two. I like the knight on d4. It controls to some extent the e6 square, so there's always potential at some moment to go in there. And you have to ask yourself, what exactly is Black doing on the king side? White looks super solid in this position. And in this kind of position, for me the best move would be to put the pawn back on f7. Not possible. But okay, so I think Black has to play decisively here, which Nakamura did. Knight takes a4. And White goes in. Black takes, but of course this opens up the diagonal. And now Queen e8 played to defend here. And now an interesting choice from Aronian. He took on b7. Well, it turns out extremely well, but you know, there are alternatives. For example, I wonder about queen a2. That's quite interesting. And if b5, then bishop b7, and all hell breaks loose here. But it feels to me as though white is better. But bishop takes b7 was very interesting because it involves a queen sacrifice. Aronian took on a6 and now knight c3. And so we have a material balance of rook and bishop against queen. And at first glance, I have to say, I really liked white's position. If he can get control and, you know, start getting the rook to b7 and, you know, maybe double here, things are looking good. And you know, black's pieces are pretty locked in. And then, okay, then we started to try to find counterplay. And yeah, we liked g5. We liked Nakamura's move g5 because suddenly, you know, black is trying to open up lines on the king side for the rook and the queen. And yeah, I don't know, the more we looked at it, more it seemed as though black was absolutely fine. But, well, let's see what happens. It's very, very interesting. Well, here, you know, I was trying to play moves like knight h5 and coming around to attack this pawn, but seems like this kind of thing could be good for white. And now here, and this looks rather dubious from black's viewpoint. And initially, I didn't like this move, knight g8. It seemed very passive to me to come back. But the knight supports the pawn, and it means that the queen and the rook are now free to come up the board. And this is probably a good idea. Netelma says, anyone who plays the Leningrad Dutch knows how it feels when you get boxed in like this. Yeah. Kevin United says how Nakamura couldn't organise counterplay with his queen was something odd. Well, let's have a look at this, because it seemed to me that I think Nakamura actually played very well around here. I think knight g8 rather surprised me, but I think it's a good idea because basically he can whip this pawn off. Okay, c5, just getting rid of this potentially weak pawn. And here, well, after Nakamura took, I thought this was going to end in a draw. It looked as though, yeah, we're just going to get a position with queen against rook and minor piece and nothing much happening. But well, we'll see what happens in a second. But maybe, okay, Kevin United makes a good point. How couldn't he organise counterplay with his queen? Well, maybe this was the moment when he could. Just when white's pieces are just treading on each other's toes a little bit, and there are a couple of loose pieces, this might have been the moment. You have to remember that I think Nakamura was a little bit short of time here, but this might have been the way to go. Okay, so queen f6. So first of all, he's attacking the rook, and this is a slightly awkward moment for white. If you move the rook along here, then the bishop is then unprotected. So for example, rook here, and now queen takes e6, and this is very tricky indeed. So for example, c takes d6, and suddenly two pieces are attacked. Or c6, and again two pieces are attacked. So you can we can see how black is exploiting these slightly awkwardly placed pieces. Well, okay, we could try instead rook c1, but now zip, we've got a bit of counterplay here. Now I don't think white should lose this position, but I'm just seeing that, you know, this is tricky. Okay, and suddenly, again, things are attacked here. This is a tricky position. So I think that might have been the move. I mean, I suspect it should be a draw with best play, but suddenly White has to be careful. But this is very interesting. I think Nakamura just thought, well, I'm taking this pawn, I'm very safe, shouldn't be any problems, maybe on a good day I can even press. But this is so interesting. It just showed that Black still has to be very, very careful here. Just for a moment, his pieces aren't very well coordinated. Knight f3 was an excellent move, a really excellent move. So first of all, we're hitting pawn on g5. Okay, queen d6 happened. And now, again, an excellent move, knight d4. So obviously queen takes rook is met by knight e6 check. But the point is that White has a threat to take on f5. And this threat comes very quickly, and suddenly it's difficult for Black to coordinate himself. So, if you play a move like e6, then this exposes the 7th rank. Also, this pawn is weak. Why not knight takes g5, says V-Dragon. Aha, same tactic. And knight e6. And Thomas B98 has he supplied the answer? He has. Aha, he has supplied the answer. Thank you very much for that. Okay, well, let's have a look at the game. So knight d4. But it's curious how this is suddenly not easy at all for Black. And now rook c6. These pawns are vulnerable. Rook c1, excellent move. So now there are always threats here. Okay, Nakamura understandably tried to stir things up, but watch what happens. He actually loses a pawn. And Nakamura simply took on f4. Well, here's a moment when you have to wonder, was this a better chance? I don't know. I think White would still have pretty good winning chances in this position as well. The bishop can guard the king, and then the knight probably has to remain passive. I suspect that White has decent winning chances in this position after he reorganises his rooks. The Kingman says, do you think Nakamura overlooked perpetual after queen b6 or was just too optimistic about his chances? Okay, so there's a chance for a perpetual. Let's have a look at that. If I just go back in this, wait a second, which position? Do you mean this position? Queen b6. Yes. Was there a chance for a perpetual here? Let's have a look at that. This might have been the way to go. And now here, check. I guess this is what you're referring to. And now it looks like a perpetual to me. Yeah. Okay. We looked at this variation earlier. Now I wonder, after queen b6, is there an alternative for White in this position? That's the only question. Yep, the Kingman, I've understood. I don't know. Remember, this is the 40th move, so Nakamura was running short of time. Who knows? Maybe he saw something in this position. So after the position repeats, one thing is, I guess, no, it's not as good, but White could play this position. Now after the trade of rooks, maybe it's not so great for White. I would be a little bit worried about that. Now maybe e5 unsettles. Just for a moment, White is a little bit poorly coordinated. White can coordinate, it might still be good for white. Here, and check, and the king is safe. Still could be winning chances for white. Don't know, I'd rather not exchange rooks. But that's interesting. Queen b6 might be the way for black to defend. Okay, let's have a look at the game. So knight takes f4, and now it's very interesting that I'll leave you to analyse all that if you don't mind. I'm going to crack on with the game. It's very interesting that black is in big trouble here because he's going to lose another pawn. Mr. Tambourine Man says, maybe a perpetual, but I suggested this because I feel there's a fortress after rook takes f4. I don't think there's a fortress. I think white has plenty of ways to try and make progress. Anyway, black is losing this second pawn, and this is fatal. You know, the king is just too exposed here. But you still have to be extremely careful. I think you have to play very solidly indeed. White just has to make sure that all the pieces are protected. Okay, let's see what happened. So the king finds a very nice safe spot on h3 and can even come up the board to protect h5. Let's see what happens. Okay, bishop g4, good move. If knight takes bishop, then we play check and that one and take the queen. So basically he's made room for the knight to come to e6, and now this is the end because black's king is in a terrible mess. If king h7, f4 is nasty. So the queen comes this way and we take on f6, or yeah, well that's the end basically. Or the queen comes this way and bishop f5 is mate. Nasty stuff. So knight g8 forced, but now this is actually pretty easy. So the bishop is coming in, and that was that. In this position black resigned. Very interesting indeed how Aronian still managed to generate play even from this position. Let me see, this position here. When it seemed as though he'd blown his chances, but actually this was great. Knight f3 to d4, and it still appears as though black has to be a little bit careful. And I think this is probably what upset Nakamura or disturbed him. That suddenly he probably thought after he took on e6 that he was over all his problems and thought it was probably a draw. But still found himself with a few technical difficulties. Sterbens Tommy says, poor king, this is the Dutch. Yeah, absolutely. This is the problem with the Dutch. If it goes wrong, then often black's king finds itself in terrible trouble. So, there we go, folks. Levon Aronian leads the tournament with 2 out of 2, and at the start, I seem to remember Kasparov saying that there were only 2 players for his money who could possibly win this tournament, Aronian and Carlsen. Well, he might be right. Okay, more live commentary coming up over the next couple of weeks. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in and see you soon. Bye.